Breaking today, Graham Linehan has spoken out for the first time since his arrest at Heathrow Airport by 5 armed police for 3 tweets. And the Father Ted creator, and this is absolutely fascinating, got totally different treatment from the US independent broadcaster Megyn Kelly to our corrupt national public broadcaster, the British Bashing Corporation. So we're going to compare and contrast today, because it really is something to see. This was the treatment Linehan was given on the main BBC bulletin last night.
But I think
they would say it's toxic your side as well. So you're not going to tone things down?
No.
Do you regret tweeting that message now?
No, I don't regret anything.
Make a scene, call the cops, and if all else fails, punch him in the balls.
I mean, that's insulting.
Sure. It's meant to be.
Suggests violence.
Sure.
Even some on your own side say that sometimes you don't help their cause, your cause, because it would be better to act in a more civil way. Do you accept that?
Now, let's compare that to Megyn Kelly, who knows, unlike the BBC, that the treatment that Linehan has received at the hands of the British deep state, the British regime media, is completely disgusting, to the point where he no longer feels safe in what was his country. Watch.
I moved to the UK in the mid-90s, and I'm just always on edge now here, because I never know if I'm going to be arrested or attacked in the street or whatever it happens to be. Because, as you know, trans activists, apart from anything else, are very violent and very volatile. So it's just not a fun place for me anymore. So that's why I eventually moved to Arizona.
And the thing is, we can't forget. I mean, I'm very surprised by the way Linehan decided to sit down with the BBC, because we cannot forget how their role in all of this has been so disgraceful, how they are the ones who have pushed this trans extremism. And in the Megyn Kelly interview, Linehan actually accused the BBC of lying by omission. Watch.
You know, I expected at least my co-writers, Neil Hannon, who I've been friends with for most of my life, Arthur Matthews, who I've been friends with for most of my life, to stand up for me and say, no, Graham's not a bigot. Of course women need single-sex spaces. Of course they need fair sports. And I begged them to, but they never did. They just refused point blank. So, you know, And that was kind of the story with all my friends. You know, not a single one stood by me. I went out to dinner with them and I just asked them to please say something, anything that just makes it sound like I'm not insane. Because one of the problems with this, Megyn, is just people don't believe you. People don't believe it's happening because they can't take on the fact that the entire of society is lying to them. Over here in the UK, the BBC has been lying by omission about this subject for the last 8 years.
Yes.
People, you know, and the woman, I don't know, I sent you a video of I was ambushed on Newsnight by Sarah Smith, who basically just made it all about the way I conducted myself online. Again, you know, of course I was angry. You know, I was furious all the time because
you're missing the issue.
They're missing the issue.
And it's really important to talk about Sarah Smith, by the way, because as Graham Linehan points out, she is now in control of the BBC's news output out of America. Watch.
Sarah Smith is now the head of BBC North America, and I always worry when I see Americans taking on these very, very left-wing attitudes on Palestine and on the trans issue. I do wonder how much of it is because a lot of liberals over there are sort of Anglophiles, you know, which is very nice of them, but they take papers like The Guardian too seriously, channels like the BBC too seriously. And all these institutions have been completely captured. It's like a war has been fought without a bullet fired. And all these lunatics now have their feet under the table and are doing everything they can to continue to confuse the British public about what's going on.
Yeah, I think that was very important actually to raise the role of women like this who have not been journalists over this process, who have been activists. In this Megyn Kelly interview, it really is fascinating, by the way, and this really upset me when Graham Linehan just spoke about how, and I know what it's like when you're cancelled, I really do, just about how all of the people who he thought were his friends just ran away. Big news! Outspoken is now available as a podcast too. So please do subscribe wherever you get yours, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and make sure you rate and review. I'll take 5 stars, if you may.
And I genuinely thought that all my friends would come rallying to my side, all the friendships I've made over my whole career, and not a single person stood up for me. So I started to be targeted by actually a very small group of trans-identified men, one of whom is a convicted sex offender who sexually assaulted a boy when he was 14 years old. And these men have the police wrapped around their fingers. Not just me who's been arrested. There's been, several dozens of women arrested in the UK over the last 8 years. And again, these women are suffering in silence because no one with any authority will stand up to them. You know, Keir Starmer came into power saying that he would end the culture wars, but he hasn't. He's just hid from them. So as a result, women are being hauled into court, put into cells, and you know, the police over here are basically working for trans activists.
Just listen to that final line. The police over here are basically working for trans activists. It is horrifying, especially, by the way, given those trans activists are some of the most extreme people in the country who even doxed Graham Linehan while he was still with his wife. Watch.
The person I mentioned earlier, the sex offender, he released my home address online when I was still at the family home, which absolutely, you know, terrified my wife. And even recently, actually, that's to do with my current trial. I can't talk about my current trial, but they released our family address at home because I used, you know, as the writer of Father Ted, I was fairly well liked. So neither of us thought we had to be careful with our online footprint. But of course, when it flipped and I became public enemy number 1, all the things that we put online were kind of rifled through by trans activists for anything they could use against me. And the first thing was my address. Then they started calling the police on me, and the police came to our home one Sunday morning, which really upset my wife. It was, since then, it's been, you know, never ending. It's I've been visited by the police, I think 3 times now, not including the arrest.
What?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They came to my home. No, is it 3 times? Yeah, once at my home, once at a flat, and once in London. And you know, I moved from Norwich to London when I got separated, and I've never been out of litigation in this whole fight. I'm constantly being sued. I'm being sued at the moment by a particularly rabid trans activist named David Paisley, who's a C-list actor who you know has been involved in some appalling harassment of women, and it's just constant. I'm never not on edge.
Connor Tomlinson of Tomlinson Talks on YouTube. I mean, I know Graham Linehan. I think he's a great guy. I know how much he's been impacted by this, always on edge. And that's obviously how America is hearing his story, and they're horrified. They are utterly horrified by what is going on here in the United Kingdom. But at the top of the segment, I played that BBC News report. Just a totally different angle. It's so obvious they're coming at that story as if he's the one in the wrong.
Yeah, you can hear it in Graham's voice that the stress has really taken its toll on his personal life, on his physiology. I mean, unimaginably rough for taking what is a sensible stance on wanting to protect women's single-sex spaces and protect them from violent, predatory, autogynophile males. And it's extra absurd that the BBC takes the position of being the ardent defender of said sex-obsessed men's reputations, because no, they don't deserve our respect at all. Graham Linehan did nothing wrong. If anything, it was commendable by telling women to defend themselves from violent, predatory men who want to invade their spaces. Respect is a currency, and you debase that currency when you give it out to people who do not deserve it. And do you know who doesn't deserve it? Porn-addicted men who wear a dress and then pretend that they are oppressed. And Graham Linehan has correctly identified lots of them, taken them to task, and unfortunately has been hauled through the courts and is suffering because of it. And the reason the Americans are so scared of this precedent, or so outraged might be the better term, is because he made lots of these tweets while he was in Arizona. So he flew over from Arizona, he touched down at Heathrow Airport, and was greeted by 5 armed guards, one of whom had a distinctly UK, Y-O-O-K-A-Y accent when he was telling him what he'd been charged for in that audio of Graham's arrest. And so the Americans are thinking, well, if I visit the UK as a US citizen, am I going to get in a diplomatic incident and be arrested for something that I have said? Especially considering Graham Linehan is not a British citizen as far as I know. He's an Irish citizen. He has an Irish passport. So they're thinking, are the British police just going to snatch me off the tarmac and haul me away to jail for something that I'm First Amendment protected? And I've just seen in the last couple of hours that Graham is now boarding a flight to Washington, D.C., not directly to Arizona. So hopefully he's going to go speak to someone who is interested in the Trump administration, in defending his rights, and in leveraging their position as the global hegemon to ensure that we Brits have more free speech in this increasingly totalitarian country.
By the way, I also believe he's right to call out Sarah Smith. She's one of these BBC presenters who is not spoken about as much as she probably should be, Connor, given her huge influence as the reporter who covers Trump and the administration. And we know with John Sopel in the previous Trump administration that the BBC is an anti-Trump propagandist. But Sarah Smith is a particularly interesting one because do you remember that BBC interview, that Newsnight interview, when she was just utterly vile towards Graham Linehan? And of course, what a lot of people probably forget, and obviously you don't always share your parents' politics, but you know, she's someone who has been indoctrinated by left-wing politics and hard left politics for all of her life, obviously as the daughter of the former Labour leader John Smith. But first, let's be honest, you're watching this because you know the mainstream media can't be trusted anymore. The so-called fact checkers, they're just part of the same corrupt club. And who can forget the scandals they helped cover up or spin? Brexit lies, the COVID chaos, the relentless smears against Donald Trump. Well, I've had enough of being misled. That's why I've turned to Ground News, today's sponsor. It's the one place I go to slice through the spin, cut out the noise, and finally see the truth for myself. Go to ground.news/outspoken to check it out for yourself. My favourite feature is the blind spot feed. It shows you which stories are blowing up on one side of politics but barely mentioned on the other, the clearest way to see media bias in action. So let me show you a story the left is ignoring. The terrorist mastermind of the 7/7 attacks could soon be back on London streets despite police fears. You'd think this would be a huge story everywhere, right? But left-leaning outlets have barely touched it. And what about on the right? Well, the UK Chancellor says the government is back in Scotland with billions in investment. It's a massive funding pledge, yet it's barely been covered by right-leaning media. With every story, Ground News shows you the entire spectrum of who's reporting from left, right, and centre, along with how reliable each source is and who owns each outlet. It's everything the corporate press doesn't want you to see. I know you love keeping up with the news, but like me, you don't buy what the legacy media are selling. So this gives you the tools for yourself to see what's really going on without the spin, without the manipulation, and without being told what to think. It's the only way I read the news now, and clearly many of you agree, as Ground News has over 10,000 five-star reviews. So go to ground.news/outspoken and stop letting the mainstream media decide the truth for you. If you subscribe through my link, you'll get 40% off the Vantage plan. That's the one I personally use for unlimited access. Supporting Ground News also supports Outspoken, so thank you for helping me keep doing what I am doing here too. That's ground.news/outspoken. But now, back to the show.
Well, according to Jonathan Haidt's work, actually, Dan, political beliefs are highly heritable, which hopefully means that considering lots of liberals aren't themselves having children, we'll have a much more conservative generation next go around, God willing. However, the BBC has shot all of its credibility. It shot it from every camp. I mean, not least of all, appointing the son of the Hamas agriculture ministry to do its narration on a documentary they had to pull. Emily Maitlis pouring scorn on Brexit voters for a very long time, them getting their election coverage completely wrong, putting Mariana Spring in charge of fighting conspiracy theories and misinformation. In her first episode, she makes up that my friend and colleague Carl Benjamin took over the town of Totnes when he's only visited once. Honestly, the entire thing's absurd, and I don't think the Americans are falling for it. Actually, I think Graham, fortunately, has little to worry about. I think that they are Anglophiles, but they understand that the BBC is an enemy outlet for the English as much as it is the Americans. They're sourcing their opinions on their own country and ours from much more reputable institutions and alternative media sources. It's why I'm so frequently going over to Timcast to explain why we're on the cusp of civil war because of our treacherous leaders and their immigration policies that we highlighted at the top of the show. So I think that actually the Trump administration themselves are true Anglophiles. They're concerned about the suppression of our freedoms, and I would wager that people in the State Department and various senators and the like are going to get more representatives from the UK, not just Nigel Farage, over to testify in front of Congress and explain how we're becoming woke North Korea very soon.
They absolutely should. They absolutely should. Connor Tomlinson, who is the host of the brilliant Tomlinson Talks channel, which you can subscribe to on YouTube and also Substack. So brilliant to have you, Connor. We will speak next week. Thank you so much. And we're going to reveal your greatest Britain Union jackass in just one moment. But first to your comments, and thank you for your super chats today, by the way. Abata X says of Shabna Mahmood, Mahmood must be removed. Islam must not be allowed in any position of power. We've already seen their intolerance on the streets. I am horrified of the idea, let alone the reality of her in office. Trooper Bear says flags of St. George, St. Andrew, St. Patrick's, and combine the Union flag, all Christian. That's why she doesn't like it. And Alex Maman says reform needs to stay clear of Boris. He's a has-been of UK politics. He had the chance of being a PM and failed. Many of our problems are because of him. And on that note of reform and advance and GB News and Talk TV, all of that, Nick Pinkham says June Slater's wrong on backing Farage. Advance is the way. However, it needs to get massive before it's taken seriously. Promote, promote, promote. Advance UK ASAP. Adrian Smith says, I've got my train tickets for September the 13th. Looking forward to peacefully meeting up with patriots to defend free speech. Also looking forward to the train home, which will get me out of the hellhole that London is. On a similar note, Coraline Bell says, we need to stop this Islamification of our country or we will leave a dreadful legacy for future generations. And Lindsay Folsh says, how did you Brits, I mean real Brits, allow this to happen? You have to self-reflect how and why did you allow this to happen? You all had the voting power, the mind boggles. And Lindsay, look, in a lot of ways I do hear what you're saying. However, we have voted in this country since before the Rivers of Blood speech by Enoch Powell to limit legal immigration. Every single time we have been ignored. It's one of the main reasons, obviously, that we voted for Brexit. So we've been very, very let down by our politicians and by democracy. And that's why many of us believe that there does need to be a revolution coming. Okay, to today's Greatest Britain and Union Jackass. A reminder of your Union Jackass nominees. Dan Hodge is nominated by Kaz Quinn for being an absolute moronic disgrace. Beth Rigby, nominated by Matt Cass 48 because she tried to make Angie Rayner a victim. He says, you should go next, Beth. And Shabna Mahmood, nominated by Just Margaret 1 for being a Muslim minister in charge of the Home Office. And I, oh my God, I have to be honest with you, we've never had a result like this. In third position with 4% of the vote, Dan Hodges. The runner-up with 5% of the vote, Beth Rigby. But by an overwhelming margin, 92% of the vote. Today's Union Jackass, Britain's new Home Secretary, Shabna Mahmood. And today's Greatest Britain is James Whale, dearly departed. But it honestly was such a wonderful funeral yesterday. And I know in some ways, some people might think that's a weird thing to say. But you've got to remember, James knew he was dying for a very long time. And every single detail of his funeral, down to the songs that were sung and who they were sung by some of his really good friends who were pop stars like Matt Goss, were personally chosen by James. And so this was very him. And it was very him in terms of the guest list, because what I always loved about James is that he would bring together the best of politics, the best of the news business, but also the best of old school British entertainment. And that was absolutely the case yesterday. And James had also said that he didn't want to have a wake. He wanted to have an after party. And that was absolutely the case. So let's just say, after what was a wonderful funeral, where his son did him proud, where his granddaughter, who you can see there in the turquoise dress, gave the most wonderful eulogy, where his wife, Nadine, a wonderful woman, did him proud by so bravely paying tribute to the past 7 years that they had spent together. After that, we did drink the night away and really celebrate a legend of a man. As you can imagine, talk radio was at the heart of the celebrations. And James's brother, who was the pastor and the head of the parish church where the family funeral was held, did pay tribute to talk radio and said, actually, it was talk radio allowing James to stay on air until the very end that gave him so much joy and so much passion to be able to carry on. And James also was a real fan of archery. And as he was buried, I think we've got video of this actually, we can look at it. As he was buried, there were the bow and arrows which went over the grave and whistled through the trees as Amazing Grace was sung. And it really was just a perfect day. Listen to this.
Body to the ground, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, in sure and certain hope of the resurrection to eternal life.
Wow. And that's Nadine, James's wife, and one of her daughters. And she said afterwards, "Oh, Dan, I don't know if I should be smiling in the photo." I'm like, no, Nadine. All James would want was for you to be smiling yesterday. And again, for people who don't know, James was an absolute pioneer of the whole talk radio format in the United Kingdom. He created it, really. And certainly, for me personally, he was an absolute champion of my career, so generous in terms of his advice for me, and then in my very dark times over my cancellation, his ongoing support of me, even though he was dying of cancer. So it was just a wonderful day yesterday. And I know that's weird to say, but he planned it well. He planned it down to a T. So rest in peace, James Well, and thank you for everything.
Thank you so much for watching Dan Wootton Outspoken. Please click on my face just to the bottom left to subscribe to this brand new independent news source and turn on the notification bell so you'll be alerted to our brand new live shows, uncancelled interviews, and special royal episodes. Outspoken is also now available as a podcast, so you can listen to the show every weekday on the go, wherever you are.